Welcome, everyone. Thank you for staying for the forum on the behavioral covenant, the proposed behavioral covenant. I appreciate your presence here. We'll light a chalice because that's what we do when we gather together. And these words are from the Reverend Adam Slate. We gather as one community, a community united by common ideals: love, justice, diversity, freedom, mutual care, equity. Yet look around. Just take a look around. Look at the faces of those people around you. Each face represents an individual. Every one of us with our own story, our own needs and strengths and faults. We light our chalice today honoring our common connection and also the uniqueness that lives in each one of us. So thank you so much for engaging with this important topic again. The plan for today is to do just a little bit of review about the behavioral covenant and what it is and why we're doing it, and then mostly to have discussion time. I have, of course, some reflection questions for you to consider regarding the behavioral covenant. So we'll talk about what we're doing and why, share what is proposed in the behavioral covenant and changes to our current covenant, have some small groups for discussion, both on site here and for the folks online. And then we'll have any questions or comments and next steps. So before we do that, I want to introduce the folks from the Healthy Congregations team who are here and those who are not. The Healthy Congregations team was formed about a year ago. Folks said yes when I asked them, for which I'm very grateful, and they're helping shepherd this process and tend to the health of the congregation as a whole. So Martha Nikoloff is here, Don Melnick, who I think is not here, Don, Alice Curtis is here, Dan Donahue is here, Barbara Okeson is here up front, and Megan Johnson is a consultant to the team. So thank you so much for working with me and with the board on tending to our health. So for slides then, I think, Carbon, we're probably on, yeah, here we go. So just a review of what we're proposing. We are going to keep the current OUUC covenant. We're not replacing it, we're adding to it. So if you have an attachment or fondness for the current OUUC covenant, we're changing a couple of things, but primarily keeping it. I'm proposing a couple of changes to the current covenant to remove some ableist language and to remove the staff and ministers from the current covenant. And I can say some more about that if you like. And then we'll add the behavioral covenant. And then the plan is to bring the proposed changes to the congregation for a vote at a congregational meeting. The next congregational meeting will be in June. And one of my questions for you today is, are we ready to vote on this? I'd appreciate your feedback on that. So why make changes to the covenant? Well, the current covenant has, I understand it was created out of a time of conflict, which often covenants are. That's not an unusual thing. And it's not very specific about the behavior that we expect from each other. As with, typical UUs, we tend to have lofty ideals that we express, and it can be hard to make that concrete in terms of our behavior. So that's what a behavioral covenant seeks to do. The current covenant uses we will language, which is very inclusive. It suggests unity, and it can diffuse the responsibility that we each have as individuals. And so the behavioral covenant intentionally uses I will language instead of we will. Because we each have responsibility for our own behavior and our own promises. And then the current covenant includes the minister and staff. And there was a lot of discussion about this with the Healthy Congregations team and the board, and we decided to remove the minister and staff from the covenant, not because the ministers and staff are not accountable, it's that we are held accountable in lots of different ways. So there is an employee handbook that has an accountability process and makes clear what the expectations are of people who are employed here in the congregation. Most of us on staff belong to professional organizations that have a code of conduct and a code of ethics, and we're accountable to that. We're accountable to our call, we're accountable to the denomination, we're accountable to the congregation, we're accountable to each other. So as I say, we're accountable 9 ways from Sunday. And there are some things in the covenant and the behavioral covenant that really don't apply to staff, like sharing our financial resources with the congregation. You know, staff often are not members, they can be, and a staff member might pledge to the congregation. My husband and I pledge to the congregation, but that's not an expectation and shouldn't be. And so it really was a way to try to create a boundary of expectations for staff. So if you have questions about that, let me know, and we can certainly talk about that some more. So what we've done so far, we've done 11 steps in getting to this spot, and this is the 4th forum that we've had for discussion, for congregational discussion. The last one was at the beginning of December. So, you know, we had a service, we had some discussions, we had some brainstorming, we've had a writing team that worked on this, and this is one more forum today. So what I have up here is some handouts for you. One of them you may have seen if you've participated in this before. It lays out the history of what we've done. It has the proposed changes to the current covenant and the proposed behavioral covenant. There is also the list of reflection questions that I would propose for you today to take into your small groups. We'll have those up as well. Oh yeah, here's all the things that we've done so far. So the workshop, the writing team, if we go through these then, on the next slide, we had a bunch of forums last spring. It went to the board, went to the congregation, we revised it with feedback, we gathered the Healthy Congregations team. We had another forum later in the year. The writing team did some more revisions, and then we took it up again in the fall. So I have the process laid out for you. I have the questions for you printed if you prefer them. And I also have a copy of the non-covenantal behavior policy. This is a policy that was written and adopted by the board a couple of years ago, and it outlines the process that we will take when when there's been harm done, essentially, when there's been a situation where someone has been harmed and identified that someone has acted out has acted in a way that is against the promises that we make to each other. So those things are up here. And there's also a bunch of links that we can put in the chat and that are in the handout if you wish to look at them, including the policies, the employee handbook, and some other resources you might find helpful. So you may be looking at the behavioral covenant and the covenant for the first time today. You might be looking at it for the 100th time today. And if you are like me, every time I look at something with fresh eyes, because I'm a different person and it's a different time, you might see something different today. What I would invite you to is to not wordsmith. This really has been wordsmithed quite a bit. If there are words that are challenging to you, please ask about them and discuss them. And if there are words that you really object to, I would love to hear about that, either in a conversation or by an email if you want to do that. The intention really is to deeply engage with this covenant, this proposed covenant, with the idea of what would it mean for it to be in place in this congregation? what would be required for us to live into this covenant, both the covenant that we currently have and a behavioral covenant if we adopt them. Does that make sense to you, what I'm asking then? Okay. So we'll go into some small groups then to engage with the questions, and these are the questions that I'm proposing. Do you have concerns about the covenant not applying to the minister and staff? Do you think the congregation is ready to adopt this behavioral covenant? And if not, what would need to happen to prepare the congregation? What is your role in the congregational covenant? And then if you have time, some big questions that you might take up. What do you think is the purpose of covenant? When have you experienced being in covenant? When have you experienced not living up to our agreements? And what should happen when we do not live up to our agreements or our covenant? So I'm going to propose then that we go into small groups next. Before we do that, do you have any questions or comments that you'd like to make?
Just one. I haven't seen it, so I don't know what we're talking about yet.
Yeah, I haven't seen what's been wordsmithed, so at some point do we get to see that? Are you going to have handouts?
There's handouts laid out up here, and the proposed covenant and the proposed changes are all in the handouts up here. So I would invite you to come up and get one of those. Any other questions or worries or concerns? And just by the way, I'm bringing the mic around when you have questions because while we can hear you in the room, the folks online can't hear you without the microphone. So we want to include everybody. Carbon, are there any questions or comments from folks online? Okay. So I would propose then that we count off. That's been helpful to kind of break folks up and have you in groups maybe with folks you don't know. Make sure to introduce yourselves. And a member from the Healthy Congregations team will probably join each of the groups just to listen in and feel free to ask them any questions or give any feedback to them. So thank you everyone for your discussion. If you could wrap things up, our online folks have joined us again. And please feel free to stay in your groups. Not ready to be done, I can tell.
Holly, since you took such nice notes, would you like to be our group? To be our group representative.
So I'm going to ask the online folks to share first what insights they have, any feedback they want to share, any questions. So Carbon has asked you to raise your hand if you have something you'd like to share from online.
So I took notes for our group. I'm Holly Porter, she, her, and so I'll share briefly what we talked about. Didn't think about the consequences of being the note taker there. So our group agreed that we did not have concerns about the covenant not applying. We had some comments about that in terms of we had a future minister who was unable to pledge, there would not be the expectation. And a belief that the staff who are also members are expected to meet the same standards. So that was one person's comment. Do you think the congregation is ready to adopt this behavioral covenant? And if not, so we agreed that we couldn't speak for the rest of the congregation, but our breakout group all agreed that we're ready to adopt it. And we appreciate the ample time and opportunity for people to have input. And I have to say this with the addition of a comma after the first harmful. Sorry. And then what is your role in our congregational covenant? Understand it, abide by it, hold ourselves accountable to it, teach and demonstrate right behaviors. And there was a suggestion to have or continue to have workshops on nonviolent communication, conflict resolution, and disagreeing respectfully. What do you think is the purpose of covenant? Safety, clear expectations. People can't just come in and take over. when have you experienced it? Within OUUC groups create covenants at the beginning before they start their work or activity. Other experiences of covenant being religious, marital, intentional community covenants. And the the Big Bang roommate agreement was also referenced. When have you experienced not living up to our agreements or our covenant? And someone talked about that in past times of conflict where emotions were strong. People were hurt when the covenant was not specific enough to avoid harm. So there's appreciation that this behavior covenant could prevent that sort of thing. And lastly, what should happen when we do not live up to our agreements or our covenant? We just had refer to the non-covenantal behavior, the document that the board produced. That's it.
Great, thank you so much, Holly, and thank you folks online for your deep engagement with the questions. So how about if we start with you were number 4 up here, right? So are there things that you would like to share? Insights, questions?
So our group thought that there were some steps that would need to be made to be ready for a decision in June, and also to be ready for this to be in place after June if it were approved then. And a lot of that had to do with messaging, that we wanted to do whatever we can to make sure that all of the members and friends of the congregation have the opportunity to engage and are aware of the draft behavioral covenant before then. So we talked about the possibility of asking various groups within the congregation to bring it up at one of their meetings or conversations that's already scheduled. We talked about having handouts, copies of it available just here as you walk into the sanctuary or out in coffee service. We talked about holding a informal forum type conversation during coffee hour in lieu of the questions to make it more accessible for folks who can only stay for a short time after service. And so we talked about those things to get ready, and also to clarify the procedure for questions or concerns. So if somebody picks up a handout or they get it in their email, we also wanted it more available digitally. We want wherever it's posted it to be clear, if you have questions about this or if you have concerns about this, here's the step you can take. Email this person, come to this meeting, just so folks have clear understanding of where it's going from that point.
Thank you for the concrete suggestions. I like concrete. So the group that was back here, 3, is there somebody from your group that you want to?
Hello. We had some discussion about a couple of the specific items, intent versus impact, and some concerns that it was very wordy, but we are not in agreement about whether the congregation is ready to vote on it. I would say that more work needed to be done to make more people aware of it, and also that we need to really work on getting physical copies of the document into congregants' hands prior to any further discussions. And but overall, that it is something that is good, it needs to be done, and that we should try and put it for a vote at the annual meeting and take the temperature of the congregation. If it passes, great. If it doesn't, it'll show us we still need some more work to do.
Thank you. So there, group 2 was over here. Is there somebody from that group who can report it? Pardon me.
Well, I have to say my notes were reflecting what the Healthy Congregations team needed to be aware of and not comprehensive notes, as I've heard before, so bear with me. I think in general, the group felt that we were ready to go for a vote at the annual meeting. There definitely were concerns about the specificity being needed so people knew if they have a conflict or if they see some sort of difficulty occurring in any of the behavioral covenant areas, that they knew, here's what I need to do specifically. Here's step one, here's step two, who do I go to, what happens, and that needed to be very clear so that people knew exactly how to seek help from the community. There was discussion about the need for all of us to be active, to be a part of the covenant, to be willing to practice the elements of the covenant, even though, you know, some of those would be challenging, and to recognize that we would all be challenged at various points. There was a question about whether the behavioral covenant is being covered in the new member classes. So I thought was a good question. And another comment about how to resolve a situation if someone refuses to engage in conflict resolution.
Great questions. And yes, the congregational covenant and the proposed behavioral covenant are talked about in the new member class. And how about this group up here? Is there somebody who, Dan? Okay.
The group I participated in had quite a discussion around three main areas that I recorded. Some are consistent with comments that have been made already. One is that there's need for more publication of the behavioral covenant, and there were specific suggestions made that hard copies be provided at services, it be covered in the Thursday update online, perhaps consider snail mail update, and finally a suggestion that the covenant actually be read out loud during something, not in the exact, maybe the services, maybe community dinners or something, but at some point that it actually is expressed, is actually read. And then there was a significant discussion about who is held to the covenant. Does a visitor to the congregation, is a visitor held to the covenant, or is it only members who have committed and pledged and stuff like that? Who is bound by the covenant? Anyway, that's an interesting issue. And then finally, it was felt that there's more clarification necessary as to what are the consequences if issues among congregants can't be resolved even with the aid of the Healthy Congregations team. So what are the final steps in this process? And can group one think of anything else?
No, I think you covered it.
I think that's about it.
All really good questions. Thank you. So it sounds like there's some variety on whether the congregation is ready, and you all have the same concern I have. There are folks who don't even know that we're having this discussion, right, when it comes up for congregational vote. So how can we make that available? And it sounds like a lot of the questions are, so what happens if we adopt this? What does what does repentance and repair look like? Yeah? So, yeah, what happens next? Who can you go to for help? What's the formal process to come back in right relationship? And what are the consequences if someone says, I'm not interested? What are the consequences if somebody says, I don't care if I'm harming others? And I would say in terms of who this applies to, it could be somebody who's a visitor who might show up and say something that's really harmful to someone. And then the discussion might be, this is how we do things here. You know, these are the agreements that we have for the people who come here. I want to make you aware of this. This is what happened. And so what might need to happen next. And of course, some of it depends on what's said or what's done, right? So, but it's kind of being ready to say, this, ouch, this, you know, this isn't how we are with each other here. So thank you all. So is there anything that anybody wants to share that hasn't been shared here in the room? Thanks, John. How about online? Nothing else online? Okay. Carbon's going to put the comment on the screen. Once adopted, a wall hanging or display in the commons. Oh. Sewing ministry. Karen. We need a quilt. Yeah, Claudia. All right, Claudia and Wendy. So maybe that's, yeah, sure, something to, we have Gandhi back here for right now, so we certainly could have that. Yes, Frank.
One point came up at our discussion toward the end, and that was there seems to be different kinds of conflict, and one would be two individuals who conflict, and then another would be if one or more individuals is disturbing the entire congregation through gossip or something like that. And then somebody would have to step in, say.
Yeah, there's lots of different situations. And one of the things the Healthy Congregations team has talked about is, do we create some scenarios? And we just kind of talk through next, you know, what might this look like? What might the resolution or the next steps look like in particular circumstances? So might work on that as well. So I want to thank you each of you for your engagement with this. For those of you who are seeing this for the first time today, thank you for showing up to engage with this. Please share the word with your circles of folks at OUUC and the groups that you're a part of. And I anticipate we'll be doing some more this spring. And we may bring it to the congregational meeting this year. It might be another year if we're not, you know, folks aren't feeling like we're ready. So a covenant isn't something that has to be hurried. And really it's the adoption of it is the first step. It's really how we live into it that is the bigger deal. So thank you all. So the chalice has gone out, which means we've been at this for an hour, but let me have some closing words as we leave together here. These words are from Vanessa Taitang. Like the flame of the chalice, may the flame in our hearts burn, remaining unextinguished. May it ignite our energies, our drive, our resolve to dream, to build, to live into the world, that good which exists for now only in our imagination. Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your Sunday.